Welcome to the Cannaman podcast, hosted by Global Cannabinoid Solutions, the world's leading cannabis science firm and cannabis market entry specialists. We look forward to hearing your thoughts on this latest episode of Cannaman.
And I was diagnosed with epilepsy when I was 10 years old. What's interesting though is I know that I had epilepsy prior to that, and the first seizure I recall I was about 6 years old, but my seizures weren't noticed by parents or anybody else, and my epilepsy got worse and worse the older I became, which is quite unfortunate because lots of people do grow out of it, but yeah, life was like, no, sod off, you're going to keep it. And so I went from having focals and absent seizures through to tonic-clonic seizures, and alongside that, which is really common in people with epilepsy, no matter their background, psychiatric comorbidities. So I was trying to cope with that as well. And then the impact of more so actually the anti-epileptic medications, or anti-seizure medications rather, than the seizures themselves. Of course, the seizures were, just horrific, but having to take these anti-seizure medications every day, twice a day, and these drugs, right, they basically try and stop excess activity in your brain, i.e. seizures, but in the process, they try and stop or restrict all activity in your brain. Obviously, that makes learning really difficult, which is pretty negatively impactful when you're a child, let alone an adult, because I'll come on to that as well. And I ended up having, to cut a very long story short, I ended up having a temporal lobe resection in 2013. And the reason that I actually had it was, there you go, over 20 years without controlled seizures, which is outrageous, really. That shouldn't be happening, because we know that if you've tried 2 anti-epileptic drugs, the likelihood of any others proving fruitful, if you like, in controlling seizures is very slim. But anyway, so I had that. That saved my life, because I know my risk of SUDEP was huge. I know that now, and I knew that just before surgery. That's what my fabulous neurologist at the time, Tim Boehner, by the way, if anybody wants to look him up, he basically said it to me, your life expectancy isn't great. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I did kind of giggle, because I love just him being blunt with me like that. He knew he could be. I was like, well, just scoop the bit out if you can, because I'm going to die anyway. And of course, with the mental health issues at the same time, which was emotional disorder, depression, anxiety, I was like, I don't really care, so just do it. And I was very, very lucky to be suitable. I was very, very lucky to be in a tiny little island in this world, having the NHS, which gave me access to this. And actually, that's part of the reason I moved to London when I was younger, because I knew there would be better care here. And then since then, I have far fewer seizures. I still have them, and I'm still on anti-epileptic medications, but much lower dosage. And a lot of people think if you have partially controlled or controlled seizures, then everything is good, and it is really not the case. And this is not like, oh, pity me, it's none of that. But my point is, though, that no matter if you have controlled seizures or not, you are still, generally speaking, a lot of people are still very negatively impacted by the epilepsy due to fears, anxieties. What if I have a seizure? I don't personally worry about that, because I'm like, meh, but many people do. Indeed, the impact on your cognitive function. Memory is a huge, huge issue for many, many people, especially if you've had a bit of your brain scooped out. So that's the overall summary. I mean, I talk about this as a profession, so I could go on forever, but what I've learned, though, I will say, is, especially since being involved with EpiCare, which is an EU-funded organisation for the rare epilepsies, where having refractory epilepsy is very common. We have lots of children, especially, but adults too, who have so many seizures a day, up to 300-400 a day. Varies a great deal, of course, and the number of seizures, and the drugs don't work for them. And I really truly empathize. I mean, I never had that many a day, nowhere near, but I know what it's like to not know what is coming, not like the next week or the next day, but like the next moment. And I also really, really empathize with carers, mums, dads, families. They rarely get a say, I feel, because at least if we are having seizures, as horrific as they can be, especially if we're having tonic-clonics, at least for that moment, we're kind of off our faces. It's the people who are watching and like loving you who are like freaking out, understandably, especially if you are having many of them. I can also say that I have a friend who she cracks me up, but she came over to stay one time, and she had so many seizures during the night, and given it was a cluster, and given it was almost like basically status epilepticus, of course I called an ambulance. And anyway, long story short, again, she ended up in hospital for a month down here in London, and she's not from South. So, and it was just so traumatizing for her. So with people who have epilepsy, comorbidities are very, very common. As I mentioned before, learning disabilities are very common, and also psychiatric comorbidities are very, very common. And depending upon who you talk to, they could say, actually, my psychiatric issues are way more negatively impactful than, say, the seizures, which is quite the reverse of what a lot of people might generally think. And I've often said I would rather have a seizure a day than experience mental health issues. But and do you know what? Like, we have some amazing neurologists or epileptologists, and we have the same for neuropsychiatrists. We have the same for psychiatrists and epilepsy nurses. But there's often a bit of a break in not necessarily communication, but in patient and family access, especially between psychiatric professionals and neurological professionals. And when you consider the distinct link between these issues, it's your brain after all. It's a bit silly, a little bit inefficient, and very frustrating for us, of course, for families, but also for the medical professionals. It's like, oh my goodness, like what, we need to. Taking drugs every day, well, to me, it's like second nature because I've been doing it for 30 years. However, that doesn't make it pleasurable. I'm great at swallowing all my drugs in one go. But yeah, I wish I didn't have to do it because I know it's slowing me down. I'm very lucky to have access to these drugs. But it does make you, I often think, at least once a day, what could I have done if I hadn't been diagnosed with epilepsy and I wasn't taking these drugs? Because I used to want to be an airline pilot, a surgeon, or a dentist. Obviously, not going to happen, and rightly so. I don't, it wouldn't be right to want to ever risk other people's health and life for the sake of my own frustration and arrogance. But, these drugs, as well as the seizures, put quite a restriction on many people's lives. Now, it's actually worth saying too, though, that lots of people, about 52% of people in this country anyway, with epilepsy do have controlled seizures, which is fab, and of course, the people who tend to have controlled seizures and tend to be able to cope with their lives okay, and I do know a couple of people personally who do that, and it's like fab, I'm not jealous at all. We don't hear about those good stories, but the thing is, we want more of those good stories. And so many people deserve to have better, more effective treatment that, gives them, it sounds harsh, but a life worth living. Because I tell you what, a lot of people feel quite the opposite when they have uncontrolled seizures. So you asked me what it's like to have a seizure. Well, and my first question would be, what type of seizure are you talking about? As I mentioned before, about 60 different types of seizure. So I could say if I'm having a focal aware seizure, that is so frightening because I don't know where it's going to go, because it could go in from an aura to a focal aware to a focal lack of awareness through to a tonic-clonic, which used to happen a lot before surgery. It still happens occasionally now, but I've adjusted my lifestyle, and I'm lucky to be able to do that, which makes me much less likely to have a seizure. But the frightening feeling of that, even if you just have an aura, is, I mean, what could you compare it to? I mean, I skydived before and I loved it, but I was so scared, obviously, when I was allowed to. And maybe that's the fear that many people feel, like, oh my goodness, what is going to happen? And I am going to lose control. Am I going to wet myself? Am I going to poo myself? But then I think, what's the fear of lots of people who aren't able to articulate that fear? And how alone must they feel inside? That's what I feel like, you know, us lot need to be able to give these people a voice. Gosh, it's just so upsetting. And then coming round from a seizure, that can be utterly frightening. It can be exhausting, depending on the type of seizure you've had. Some people, not that many, but some people get post-ictal psychosis, which is generally temporary, but, you know, it's still frightening. Some people can get aggressive during that period, and that's not them, that's not who they are, but it can happen, and then they get judged for it. And then if you think about what it's like, people say in rural areas of Africa, not all, but some, I know that children are murdered because they have epilepsy, and that's just a few hours flight from us, you know, and it's taking things to a new level that happens. But I think one of the really important things when you aren't very aware of what epilepsy is just have such an open mind, ask questions, and if you don't understand something, ask more, because when I meet people, other people affected by epilepsy, it's exactly what I do, and I'm like, wow, so that's how it feels to you. Oh my goodness, like, but we find we have much more in common than different, and the same goes between myself and those with the officially rare epilepsies. But you've just got to keep an open mind and ask. And again, going back to carers, the same goes for these guys. I did a talk at Tuberous Sclerosis Association, and that condition is where people have tumours growing around their body, non-cancerous generally, but about, I think it's 80-90% of them develop epilepsy as a result of tumour in their brain. And I did a talk there about depression, because although I don't have tumours in my brain, I can empathise with them. And it was lovely actually to see, you know, so many patients, so many of their mums and dads, so many clinical epilepsy. When I was 10, I was just given some pills, and I would see my neurologist once a year, despite the pills not working. I really liked my neurologist. He was really nice, my pediatric guy. But it was like, there's some pills. Oh, well done, bye. In retrospect, of course, attitudes have changed now, and there's been some fabulous research of late, which is continuing now, which is always something I hold on to give me hope. But I experienced mental health issues from a very young age. The earliest I recall, I was 8. And this was not recognised by family at all. And I had it admitted to me that by a member of the family that they didn't believe I had epilepsy until I was 32. That was when they saw me have a tonic-clonic seizure, and they hadn't seen me have one before, and they didn't believe that I had epilepsy, which makes a lot of sense because I didn't get support from my family for my epilepsy. A lot of people are quite shocked by this. I wouldn't say it's common as such, not that I've done a study into it, but a lot of people do experience similar things around the world, in fact. So when I see people and hear about people getting support from their family, oh my goodness, it just warms my heart, because I know how valuable that is, because I didn't have it. So I really know, you know, how much that means to the person affected by epilepsy. The love, the care, the time they spend with you about it, the effort that they put into learning about it so they can better support you, the effort they put into seeking the best help and treatment for you, especially if you're not able to ask for it yourself. which is often the case, of course, with people with epilepsy. Or do you know what? It's often the case for us general people, because unless you're a clinician and you specialize in a particular condition or disease that you are seeking help in, you're not really likely to have such a discussion with the clinician. So that's kind of like normal, if you like. So having people that love you and show that love through learning about, as much as they can, about the epilepsy that their loved one has is wonderful. And these people so need a pat on the back. And sometimes I'm a bit of an anomaly in that. So the most stigma I've had has been from family and other people with disability, in fact. So I'll tell you a bit about that. So like, yeah, the people that I've gotten sort of evils from or bitching behind my back have been other people with disabilities. There haven't been that many that I'm aware of, or that I can remember, should I say. What I've found personally is that I haven't really experienced much stigma outside of the home, because I think that I've been from day one open about it. I've never hidden it. I've been able to talk about it with a degree of confidence, and I would learn about it to a degree. And I think that that plays a huge part in how you as a person are interpreted by society. And I think I'm a bit of an anomaly with that. I'm stubborn as well. So if people I'm very defensive of other people if, you know, they are getting treated unfairly and stuff. But, you know, there is that cheesy saying, something along the lines of like, education is empowering or something, but it's so true. If you understand more about the condition that you have, you're going to be more confident talking about it. You're going to be more confident educating others about it. And I remember one time I started a new job, and on my first day I said, by the way, I've got epilepsy. And my boss, I am lucky that my boss was great. She said, oh, okay, so what do we do then? And so I explained, okay, so this is what might happen in the seizures that I have. This is the help that I would need. And she said, oh, so what about if we put you then in a room, put your desk next to this room on the corner so that you can go in there and chill if you need to, or you think that you're going to have a seizure. I said, oh, that would be fantastic. Great, thank you. And I was also asked, do you mind if we tell the team about this? Like, I'm like, no, fine, go on. And they can ask me questions, and that's cool. And then, so some of them did. And then and then I would eventually say, yeah, I get bored of this. Can I just like get on with my work? Do you know what I mean? But we would just talk about it in that way. And it's proven to be really, me anyway, really useful way and attitude to have, talking about it. Kind of challenging going back to, you know, home where things weren't recognized, but I guess that's just kind of the way that I dealt with it. But I know lots of people who have not been able to, for whatever reason, been able to deal with things in that way. And actually, it's worth noting, I purposely would work for corporates because I knew that larger organizations such as corporates had to have a sort of, they had to have rules, even if it was just for their PR, about diversity and inclusion. Because I knew this, like, they would be less likely, statistically, I imagine, to turn me away if they found out that I had epilepsy. And I say found out, I would always disclose it, always. And not just for myself, but really for everyone else. Because if I didn't disclose it, I was just encouraging fear in people. I would also have my colleagues really, I imagine, angry and frustrated if I did have a felt just like really embarrassed that I didn't know about these rare epilepsies. And we say rare, but which individually they are. But as a, you know, coming together, there are so many people with these rare epilepsies. And then, of course, even more people affected by them, like their carers, moms, dads, siblings, you know, and it's kind of like that ripple effect. And that's what I want people to know, is that a diagnosis like an epilepsy, rare epilepsy, or, say MS or something along those lines, it never just affects that one person. It affects other people around you. And yeah, we can't just expect people to just cope with something that is significantly negative. And we need to realize that people have ups and downs, just as we've learned a lot of us about mental health. Sometimes you might have depression and then you can have recovery, but then 50 years later you might get it again. It's things like that with epilepsy or with MS. People have peaks and troughs, and people can't assume that everything is okay because they see you talking here, therefore you're good, right? And desire an honest answer. And then even if you're not the person that you need them to, or that you can't cope with a negative answer or a challenging answer, find the line for them to call. I say friends are the family that you choose for yourself, and we should help them as we would family, and find them stuff. Like, my friends have been amazing since my surgery, since my breakdown, and I couldn't thank them enough ever. So, I mean, I'm being sarcastic, but it's true. Yeah. And I think we should be able to reach out even more, especially in cities. I mean, like, we're really multicultural, right? And what happens as well is you have kids who are born to, and again, this is a generalization, I don't think you can include this bit, okay? But if you have like kids who are born to families originally from, I don't know, some part of the world where, believing in spirits and stuff is common, they are going to feel that if they have the epilepsy, right? And they are going to find it tough to talk to their parents about it. A bit like coming out as gay, right? We know a lot of people in certain parts of the world, you can still be killed for it, right? So it's going to be even tougher to cope with that at home. And you've got two cultures like pulling against each other. And that impact on your mental health is just, pulls you apart. So, I mean, if you look in studies, and I've brought this up several times with, okay, cool. I can totally talk about that. So
that'd be brilliant, please. Right. Yeah. Like, I guess your top
10. First of all,
top 5.
This is like one of my passions, right? First of all,
awesome.
Epilepsy. Ooh, right. Epilepsy is not the result of evil spirits. Number one. Okay. Epilepsy does not decide your intellectual ability. There is a much higher rate of intellectual disability amongst those with epilepsy, and there is a correlation, but one does not equal the other. Putting a spoon in your pocket does not stop seizures. Worshipping does not stop seizures, and does not mean that you should stop taking your medication. If you want to worship anything, I would say worship empirical evidence and science, because that provides us with the most reliable information that we have. And alongside that, question things. Always, it's fine to question things. You don't have to be an intellectual to ask why. I think we all need to embrace our inner child or former inner child and say, yeah, but why? That's okay. And it's cool. What are some other silly things? That everybody grows out of epilepsy. Oh my goodness, if only, right? No, that's not true. That everybody who has epilepsy was born with it. Completely wrong. Another thing, a common thing people don't know is that you can have seizures whilst still in your mummy's tummy. It's not common, but that can happen. Right, so if you have epilepsy, you can't go in front of any flashing lights. That's true for 3% of people with epilepsy. 3%. So, and I'm fine with flashing lights. I'm absolutely fine. They think that I was speaking to a scientist recently, Sam Keller, amazing guy from Liverpool University, and he was saying something along the lines that basically we all have it's a bit like sexuality in that, so you have like completely straight and completely gay, for instance. That's not true. We're all on this sort of like, what's that word? Sorry? Spectrum, that's right. And it's the same for epilepsy. Anybody could have a seizure at any one point in their lives. Some people are much more susceptible to having them for whatever reason. So I think, if we can look at things that way, we'll realise that anyone can have a seizure at any one point in their lives. Anybody can develop epilepsy. I know there's a great guy called Derek Kay. And by the way, these people should be flattered because I'm awful at names because of my surgery and drugs. But anyway, Derek, he developed epilepsy as a result of injury. A car ran into him when he was little. So he got head injury, therefore brain damage, and developed epilepsy. Mine, we're not quite sure. May have been down to febrile seizure, which lasted over an hour. But we don't know. That's an iffy topic amongst scientists and stuff. But yeah, we don't know. Sometimes, like, everyone presumes it's genetic. Oh my goodness. Well, as Simon was implying, I think, don't hit me, Simon, but I think if we're on this spectrum, then genetics. So when I first heard, obviously quite a while back, about derivatives of cannabis being used as a potential treatment for those experiencing refractory epilepsy, I was like, oh my goodness, like, no way. And okay, excuse me, the reason I had this initial thought was, I know personally just 2 people who have gone into psychosis as a result of their weed. I don't know details about what they smoked or whatever, but I just know that happened. And I know that one of them also has epilepsy. I'm very, like, basically, since I got brain issues, I see my brain as a real fragile organ, which it is. And having actually had, when I was younger, I had one puff of a spliff, and I was like, oh my goodness, I was off my face for ages. Like, well, it felt like ages, apparently about 10 minutes. And I got a bump on my head, and so I was like, oh my goodness, I'm never doing that again. Of course, at school, we were taught, like, one mustn't do drugs, so since it's a drug, I put it in the same bracket as like heroin to a degree, just because it's a drug. And also because I'm very aware within the sphere of medicine, it's a taboo, pretty much. And considering I work in that sphere quite a lot, and then because I'm not a scientist, I have not studied it. I have not been in any labs doing any experiments, involving, loads and loads of people. I'm not able to, just look at empirical evidence for this, not create such a thing. And I'm also very aware that there are lots and lots of companies out there taking the mick out of people. I see it all over social media, because I think it'd be quite an easy thing to do if you have uncontrolled seizures, or the loved one that you have has uncontrolled seizures. You, quite frankly, are often desperate, and if something you think could work and lengthen your lifespan and better the life of the person that you love or yourself, you could try it. Thing is, I also know that a lot of it is unregulated, and I'm not saying all of it, I'm just saying I know that there are parts of the industry which are unregulated, which I think is very dangerous. And so I've been personally very hesitant to publicly talk about it. Although just before lockdown, I did do an interview on BBC about it and my thoughts, and I said something similar to this, but I'm just not sure. But over the past year, I've been reading more about it, and I've been speaking to scientists about it who've been researching it, trying to look at different sides of the arguments about it. And it's also made me reflect upon history when we used to read this most hilarious paper written by a scientist in, I think it's the early 1800s, and the things that people believed back then that would cure or treat epilepsy were just like nuts. There was even one about cannibalism. I'm like, wow, yeah, not right now, that's not for us. But you can see, looking back, how through science, through research, and through education, perceptions of what is acceptable as a treatment have changed, and rightly so. And I wonder if we're in a similar sort of situation here with cannabis. People are very, very hesitant to, humans don't like change, right? As a species, and the stigma regarding cannabis. Again, I think all of this is understandable, but I think we kind of need to be talking about it. But also we need to figure out a way to have the information provided to, didn't say that very well. We need to find a way of sourcing professional, reliable people to provide the information for that education. And I think we're struggling with that at the moment. And things seem to be going on behind closed doors. And what's really weird as well is that we have one nation, well, actually several nations, who, they've embraced cannabis. And we don't mean weed. We don't. They are using it for treatments, but we're not. And being the anomaly doesn't mean that you're wrong, but I do think that it really means that we should question ourselves. So that's kind of where I am.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of the Cannaman podcast. For more information on how you can safely navigate the cannabis ecosystem, take a look at some of our educational materials or reach out to us at www.globalcannabinoidsolutions.com. We look forward to you joining us on the next episode of the Cannaman podcast.